welcome back. My name is Chris Teal, and I am the co-director of the Institute for Creative Music. And we're going to continue our series on the Radiohead tune Packed Like Sardines in a Crushed Tin Box and get into a little bit of improvisation. Okay, so some things to remember about this song is we talked about it being in this sound, in this mode that we call D Dorian. And so this is something that the bass line stays within the sound. The melody, with one brief exception, stays within the sound. And the way that you can remember this is it's all of the notes of your C major scale, but starting on the second scale degree and going up to the ninth. And so if this is our concert C, that's C, so D. So the D Dorian mode sounds like this. Just from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. A great way to keep track of this, because we want that D to be our home note and not C, because that would just give a different sort of sound, is to add scale degrees. And so thinking in this in terms of D as 1, E as 2, F as 3, etc., is going to be a good way to keep track of some of the different patterns and things that we might talk about in this key or this mode or anything else. Okay, so first off, let's just sing and play that mode. We'll go ahead and first sing our home note. Do, that's a concert D, sing it. Do. Go ahead and play it. So get that good and in tune with your voice. Do. Now let's play up and down that scale. We're going to go all the way from that 1 up all the way to the top. Go up to what would be scale degree 9, just to give us some options for a little bit later. Okay, so from D all the way past the higher D up to the E and back down. Here we go. So 1, 2, ready, and do 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 do. Great. So the Dorian mode is what we might classify as one of the minor modes. It has a minor third. It's not quite natural minor all the way, because we have the lowered seventh, but not the lowered sixth, and so it's not that Aeolian mode that we think of as being all the way natural minor, but they're still in that same sort of category. Okay. So some things that we can think about when we're starting to improvise around this are just getting comfortable with the way that each of these notes feel against the home note, so against a drone. And so there are lots of different apps that you can download or use on the interwebs and just have something that will sustain a constant D. I'm going to play that for us, but we're just going to go ahead and play each of these scale degrees against that sustained D, just without any sort of tempo, but maybe improvise a little bit with long notes, short notes, just see what it sounds like, what it feels like. I'm going to try this, and then I'll make sure that you get some time, outside of this video to try it on your own, okay? But I'm going to hold a drone. I might hold down my sustain pedal on the piano with that. This is what it sounds like with just the root. What if I do it on the second scale degree? What's the third? What's the fourth one? Scale degree 5. It's great to sing and play them. What's the sixth? Right. Even up. Okay. So just get a sense of the way that each of those pitches behaves, because in a way that's different from music that has, a little bit more harmonic motion. And so most other songs you've probably encountered is going to have at least one other additional chord that might have a little bit of a different sort of pull or sort of weight. With this, you can really like spend some time on each of these different sounds within D Dorian, and it's gonna sound like it has a certain characteristic and it belongs to the sound. Certain pitches in other songs that have multiple chord changes, it feels like it really wants to go somewhere or doesn't quite belong with that sound unless you resolve it in a certain direction. This you can really kind of like lay into each of these sounds and it creates a different character. So feel free to explore each of these individual pitches. Okay, so now I'm going to take us in the direction of adding a little bit of a tempo, and back to our original idea where we're going to hear the bass line vamping, repeating over and over in the background. And I'm going to play some ideas that start on our home note, so on the concert D, and then I'm going to start to move away from that. The parameters that I'm working with, first of all, I'm only going to use pitches that are in the D Dorian mode. So as we talk about a little bit later with the melody, I might bring in that F sharp. For now, it's just going to be F naturals and all of the white notes on the piano between D and D. I'm going to start off just with ideas that start on that concert D and then maybe go away from it. The questions to ask yourself as you're listening and just really experimenting, trying to figure out what I'm doing. You can pause, rewind, get it so that you can play all of these ideas back comfortably, because this becomes your vocabulary. This is how we learn any sort of language. We need to hear people do it and experiment and kind of mess up a bunch of times until we get it the way that they're doing it. So I'm trying to get these pitches from this mode. So these are the notes I'm working with. I'm trying to have a strong sense of rhythm in a way that interacts with my metronome, or in a way that interacts with the bass line that you're going to hear looping in the background. So strong sense of rhythm, and I'm going to try not to make all of the notes the same. I'm going to try to have some accented notes and some non-accented notes. So for right now, only really those three parameters. So I'm thinking notes from this mode, strong sense of rhythm, and some accented and non-accented notes. Okay, so I want you to copy ideas that I play right after me. Here we go. 1, 2, 1, copy me. Okay, so up until that point, let's check in on the pitches that we were using. I started off just using my concert D. I expanded downward to use the lowered seventh, so concert C. I started to include the second scale degree and expanded upwards. So I've used most of the notes from the mode. I went all the way up and I used the fifth, a little bit of the fourth. I haven't really used that B natural yet. So that's something that might come into play a little bit. I'm going to try and expand some other parameters. You can come up with your own ideas, trade with yourself, and add those in as well. But just to give an example, that's one way you can do it. I'm going to now start to think maybe of using part of the melody. Okay, so this is another great way to, of course, show what song you're playing. It doesn't necessarily mean playing the melody exactly as it is without anything different throughout your improvisation, although sometimes that can be a really interesting effect or just change a little bit of the articulation. I'm going to try to play, just as an example, a piece of melody and then something different. And then I'm going to have you do that, okay? So remember, our lyrical melody was, 1, 2. After years of waiting. All right. So in the melody, we have that little phrase, and then there's space. In this case, I'm going to fill it in with something different. So we're going to hear 1, 2, 3. Ba-da-da-da. Da da da. Then I'm going to improvise something else. So now the phrases are 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. They're 2 bars long. Okay. Melody and then something else. I'll do an example and then we'll have you fill in the something else. 1, 2, 1, 2. So I'm trying to keep track of the melody itself by knowing it. Like that's the first part. In order to improvise, you really got to have a good sense of what the song is, where the form is, where the melody fits, where it doesn't, what the bass line is. And so just so that we keep the form, I'm going to use the verse melody, just the amount of material that I did there. And so we're both going to play 1, 2, 3. After years of waiting, then you're going to improvise something in the spot. We'll play nothing gained. Then you improvise in there, and we keep going. Okay? Let's give this a shot. 1, 2, melody. Then you improvise. You. Together. Okay, so you can apply the same sort of idea to the chorus, I'm a reasonable man, get off, get off, get off my case. Get off my case, something like that. But that's one method, so you can start to use this A being of, have a chunk of the melody, then something different. Chunk of the melody, something different. You could expand that, do 4-bar chunks, and then eventually you want to get to the point where you're keeping that melody in your head as a way to keep the form, because the bass line is going to be rolling along. And that's going to go, it doesn't really mark the form in the way that the melody does, and so if you're keeping the melody and that sort of binary verse-chorus form, that's going to give you some different ideas that you can do. Okay, so we can use, just different notes from that mode, start to expand from there. So that's an idea number 1. We can use chunks of the melody and then something different. We can also start to come up with different patterns that, are movable within this sound. So modal songs, because each of these pitches are going to sound, pretty relevant to the mode as opposed to something that really needs to go somewhere else. We could even take a shape or a pattern that's something like a triad. So if we're thinking within this sound, and just play 1, 3, 5. So that shape, then in this case, is just a triad. So on piano, it's really easy to visualize it. On other instruments, just go build in thirds within the key. So we're thinking it's D, F, A. So we take that shape, and so I can play around with that. That stays in a certain place. But if I take this shape, whether it's in my hand on a piano or wherever it is on your other instruments or singing it, and move it around, that can be a really interesting thing, like planing this idea around the mode. So an example of something like that, I'm going to start off with this in this case is a D minor triad, and move that shape throughout the mode. See what that sounds like. So 1, 2, B. If you do something that outlines and resolves that D minor triad back to the root, that's going to be the thing that sounds the most consonant and resolved within this. Okay, so that's something you can do playing against this bass line, taking a shape like that, moving, triads, or different intervals would be another example. So we have that part of the melody, again, we're referencing this, you realize, what if you take that shape and move it around? That starts to become something of its own sort of life. I'm improvising a little bit with the rhythm and the articulation, the length of the notes, but that's another way. So taking patterns, moving them within the shape. For those of you that don't have the same sort of visual reference of playing a piano or an instrument like this can be a really great ear training exercise, just making sure that you're playing, at least at this point, with this constraint, just notes from your D Dorian mode. So, so you can start to create patterns that move beyond intervals of minor thirds. Doing things that are in fourths and fifths. That has a very certain open quality. On instruments like this, of course, you can play multiple notes at once. Take a shape like that, like a chord, and plane it. You move it around. It's an easy way to sound good on a song like this. But you need to do it thinking about the form of the song. If you forget the melody, it's going to sound a little bit long-winded, or that you don't have any sort of direction. So if you can use all of these ideas, so we're thinking about whatever notes of this mode sound good, just sort of creating an idea based off of different scale degrees, just moving that around. So we have that. Again, always trying to use good rhythm, strong rhythm, ideas that have accented and non-accented notes that go somewhere. And we want to have ideas maybe that reference the melody. You could use things from the melodic rhythm that don't actually use the same pitches. That's another great way to do it. So maybe I'll just touch on an example of that. So if I'm creating a solo that uses the rhythm of the melody but not the exact pitches, I'm going to think of that. I'm going to leave the same amount of space but just use different pitches then. Okay, so I'll try this. So 1, 2, melodic rhythm, and 3. So that should hopefully be recognizable as something that uses the rhythm from the melody, but different pitches. So that is a good way to test your retention and your ownership of that, okay? So we have that. We have using different sort of patterns, coming up with different shapes, moving it around. For those of you instruments, or those of you musicians, I know there's probably not a lot of autonomous instruments that are taking this video course right now, although I'm not 100% sure. All of you musicians who play instruments that can play multiple pitches at once, you can take those sort of shapes, whether it's a triad or something that's stacked in fourths or something like that, and move it around. That can be really fun. Okay, so these are just some preliminary ideas for ways that you can start to improvise over a modal piece like this that just stays within one mode. So happy practicing, and we'll catch up with you next time.